Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. And earlier this year, a US court had said that most of Trump's tariffs were illegal because the president hadn't the power to impose them and Congress had given no authorization. Trump claimed emergency powers to implement them, but no qualifying emergency existed. Yesterday, the US Appeals Court confirmed the ruling. Good news for businesses and the first major pushback against Trump's executive overreach. Maybe not. The court left the tariffs in place pending a final judgment from the US Supreme Court. Oh. This would be the same Republican-loaded Supreme Court which has already allowed Trump to bypass the Constitution. So will his illegal tariffs actually be ended later this year? Well, according to experts, yes, just not by the judicial process. But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So nobody questions the fact that the president does not have the authority to just set tariff rates, except in some very restricted circumstances, even the White House. But there's nothing restricted about Trump's tariffs. They are very wide-ranging and extreme. If the United States wants to change trade policy on this scale, it is Congress which needs to authorize it. But Trump is seizing authoritarian control of America. To do this, he needs to achieve two things. First, he has to remain president beyond his normal term, or at least be able to choose his successor and have absolute control over them, much as Putin did with Medvedev before changing the constitution in Russia. Second, he has to centralise all power to his office. He cannot rewrite the constitution to grant him those powers, so instead he's just seizing them and relying on both Congress and the Supreme Court to raise no serious objections. Neither law nor constitution mean anything if they are not enforced. Like a naughty boy, Trump is less interested in what the rules are, only in what he can and can't physically get away with. So far during his second term, it's not clear that anyone has firmly told him he has limits. However, it's not just that Trump's tariffs are illegal, they are profoundly damaging for America. I'll be honest, I cannot find any good reason to suppose that the tariffs will be stopped by the Supreme Court. The same court which has made Trump immune from prosecution no matter what he does, and even blocked federal courts from enforcing the Constitution, where the president is concerned anyway, is hardly likely to stand up to him on trade policy, especially if Congress can't be asked to defend their own powers. Trump said that if this court ruling stands, it will literally destroy the USA. Extremist being a bit extreme there. He insists that the tariffs will make America rich. Nobody independent of his office says this. And that's what will eventually end the tariffs. They cannot stand the test of time because they're too damaging. I've frequently compared Trump's trade policy to Brexit, but there is one key difference. We cannot easily reverse Brexit. It took a major constitutional operation to implement it in many years, and it will take an even more intense procedure to properly reverse it. But Trump's tariffs can be ended really quite quickly and simply. He could do it himself, under pressure from lobbyists. If he stands firm, a future president could do it on day one of their period in office. It doesn't matter when it happens. When the government decides it wants to end them, it can end them really very simply. It won't need a referendum. It won't need years of negotiations with other countries. It will just need a pen and a piece of paper. And that's how I see these tariffs ending. Not with the highest court in the land doing its job and defending the law and the Constitution, because they're very unlikely to do so. It will end when three key players converge on Trump. So imagine like a pair of old-fashioned kitchen scales. So on one pan, you've got the US Treasury. Now, they're quite happy because today's tariffs haul in about a nickel of every tax dollar. It's roughly $500 billion a year that it's bringing in. Leave them in place for a decade, that's $5 trillion, which is enough, of course, to make a dent in the national debt. That is Trump's argument. Trump claims that they will raise $5 trillion based on that maths. But that maths is based on the idea that those imports will continue at the current rate and people will just pay the extra price. When I say people, I mean Americans. Not many people think this is realistic. If you raise tariffs, you reduce imports, so the revenues generated will fall well short of Trump's childish calculation. Also, Trump claims that the foreign exporters will absorb the cost. However, to do that, they'd have to reduce their prices, right? Because the imports are paid in America. The import tariffs, that is, they are paid in America. So let's say these foreign exporters did absorb those costs themselves. So that's them basically making the thing cheaper. You still don't raise as much revenue because you've made it cheaper, so the tariff at the other end is less. So the calculation doesn't work no matter what happens. However, on the other pan of those old-fashioned kitchen scales sits the economic pain. So GDP forecast to be 6% lower over time, which is more even than the 4% hit Brexit is costing us. Wages down 5%. The average family's lifetime income lighter by literally tens of thousands of dollars. The moment the pain pan outweighs the money pan, the whole thing tips, not by order of a judge, because the Supreme Court is very unlikely to make that call, but by order of the market. So who are these three players that can converge to make this happen? The first are the bond traders, often referred to as the canaries in the coal mine. Tariffs push import prices up, raises inflation. So the Federal Reserve feels the heat and raises interest rates, and boom, the dollar gets stronger. A stronger dollar makes US exports pricier and then widens the trade deficit, the exact headache tariffs were supposed to cure. So for this one, you need to watch the DXY dollar index. Every time it climbs 2 points and stays there, well, history tells us we'll get a 90-day pause on at least one tariff line. The White House calls it goodwill. Traders are saying, yeah, can you calm the dollar before it kills us? The second play would be the factories. Now, supply chains do not move quickly. They move very, very slowly. Since early 2025, companies poured billions into new US plants because the economic outlook was very good. And a lot of people actually thought Trump would be good for the economy. So there was a lot of confidence, right? So massive investment went in early 2025, electronics in Arizona, furniture in North Carolina, trainers in New England, or sneakers if you must. And that concrete is sticky money. You can't stop it just because a judge somewhere stamped an injunction, right? You know, you're committed to building it. The money's spent, right? As long as those cranes are still swinging, politicians can go up on about the jobs it's creating, and they can keep the tariffs high because that pain isn't evident yet. But that was all investment from before the tariffs. When new orders dry up, measured by the ISM New Orders Index dipping below 48 for 2 straight months, that's when boardrooms start dialing the White House. The index read 49.7 last month, which is close enough that executives are reportedly already working on Plan B supply chains. Then the third player, those in the back room doing little deals on the quiet. When news outlets were screaming about China's 125% retaliation early this year, the quiet conversations were happening over coffee in like Geneva airport lounges, right? Each side was swapping carve-out lists, right? Well, you know, carve out for solar panels here and we'll have the rare earth magnets. Special quota for a company that's got its headquarters in a key battleground state. You know, these mini deals, they never make the front page. They land as footnotes in the Federal Register. You read about them in the dedicated financial news, right? Most people don't read that. Every exemption chips away at the tariff revenue. So they're handed out like golden tickets only when polling in the Rust Belt counties slips below 45%. You know, if you want to spot one in the wild, you have to look for the words pursuant to national security objectives buried in tiny font. The headline tariffs are not the tariffs actually paid. You get exemptions. There are already exemptions in place because Trump couldn't stand the full heat of his policies. We still don't know exactly what's going on with China. But the heat is going to increase by quite a bit yet. Courts will do their thing. But by the time a Supreme Court ruling on this trickles out, the economic seesaw, according to some, may already have tipped, right? The lawsuits are basically political theatre. They keep opposition donors wired. They give the administration a ready-made villain if markets force a retreat. We've seen this in this country. Activist judges, you know. Only in America, actually, sometimes they are. It's useful. It's not decisive. You know, a consequence of not having a politically independent judiciary, right? So when do the tariffs actually die? Well, according to the experts, keep an eye on 3 market tripwires. First, 10-year Treasury yield spikes above 5% for a full week. If that happens, the experts say expect a 25% across the board cut within 60 days. ISM New Orders Index, if that drops below 48 for 2 months, watch for a lot of carve-outs within 90 days. DXY dollar index, if that surges above 108 and stays there, then the suggestion is we'll get full suspension within a few months. If 2 of those flash red, the tariffs will fold faster than one of Trump's casinos, basically. That's what economists seem to be suggesting. So some people are cheering the appeal court ruling from yesterday. Others will point out, look, the Supreme Court will ultimately make another politically motivated judgment in Trump's favour. But what will actually stop these tariffs is economic gravity. Now, some think the tariffs cannot last much into 2026, if it even makes it that far. I'm obviously not an expert, so I can only defer to those who are. But I can understand well the links in the chain here. No authoritarian dictator is ever really the supreme power. When a king loses the support of their barons, they have to reverse position very quickly to get them back on side. Otherwise, it's poker time. Just ask Edward II. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.